Where's the camera? Am I going to stand there? So where should I stand?
Oh, right. Yeah. Okay, good evening everybody and welcome to St George's Talks. The last of St George's Talks in 2023. Brought to you both live and on Zoom. Welcome to both those present here in the historic George's Church and to those online. This building was built by German migrant workers in the 18th century, 1762 its date, and hardly changed in that time. It's a very atmospheric building and being part of the scenery here in Whitechapel, the East End of London, for 2.5 centuries. My name is Rick Jones and I'm privileged to serve on the committee of this church looking after the building. We present talks once a month, the third Tuesday of every month, and then one or two other sporadic events through the year, a carol service, for instance, which took place last week, occasionally a film location, sometimes weddings, book launches. The venue is used for different purposes, although rarely nowadays as a place of religious worship. The first Saturday of each month is an organ vespers, so a monthly date when the church reverts to its original function. The talk this evening, entitled Hope and Opportunity at the End of Life, is personal to the committee at this church because we lost the chair of the committee earlier this year, and she spent her last days in the St Christopher's Hospice, and the extended title of this evening's talk, Hope and Opportunity at the End of Life, is Reflections on the History and Work of St Christopher's Hospice. Our speaker this evening is the former Chief Executive of St Christopher's Hospice and is currently the Director of Education, Research and End-of-Life Policy. So we couldn't have anyone better to present a talk on St Christopher's. Will you please welcome now Heather Richardson.
I've got to stand up here, otherwise you'll never see me.
Before you begin, let me start sharing a screen.
Lovely.
Can't find the meeting. Very small thing. That's all right. I'm going to enable you to share the screen. Let's try that again. Also want to go to the mouse. So let's share screen 1.
We've lost the mouse.
Don't know where it is. Probably got hungry and went up from here. You've got it on the screen now, I beg pardon? Are we seeing this?
Yeah, brilliant.
That's what I want. To hide this control.
Don't worry, it's fine, it's fine. I'm not worried.
Is it working?
This is not now.
No? That's what it's done. It's suspended the show, which is what tends to happen.
Can we move it forward if I...
We're in the slideshow.
Okay, so that's where we are. There we are, we're away. So thank you so much for the invitation, Rick, and it is lovely to see all of you, and lovely group, small group. So I say let's work much more as a conversation. Please feel free to ask me anything, talk to me, have a conversation as we go through. I was really looking forward to this evening. I've chosen very deliberately the particular story that I want to tell of St Christopher's. St Christopher's history is very rich. It began over 50 years ago, and actually the story of Hospice began well before that. It began at St Joseph's, and even before that, at the beginning of the 20th century. But I've chosen particularly to look at the history through this lens of hope and opportunity. One of the reasons that I did that was because I understood this talk to be in memory of Sunny, and she was known in the hospice. I didn't care for her, but she was in our hospice for a number of weeks in summer, and she was really Sunny by name and Sunny by nature. And people found, when I was telling people what I was doing this evening, people really wanted to be remembered to her family. They remembered her very clearly. And there was an optimism, a hope for her, even though what she faced was very grim at times. And so that was the reason that I chose this lens. I'm just going to get rid of something that's on here so that I can see. Great. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the very early days. In fact, I'm going to focus the majority of my time there, and then I'm going to talk about what we do currently, and finish by talking about the future for end of life, and some of the reflections for me personally that might be of interest to you as well. So we were founded as a hospice in 1967, and we were founded by this extraordinary woman, Dame Cicely Saunders, and she's probably not new to you. It would be a name that you would probably know. If you go past King's College on the Strand, her photograph is there. But I particularly like this picture of her. It's a portrayal of her in the National Portrait Gallery. And she looks, I don't know, perhaps quite an ordinary older woman. And when somebody saw it, they mentioned this dual quality in it, love and steel. And her response when she heard that was to say, love and steel, how kind. Anyone doing hospice work will need plenty of both. And she was an extraordinary woman with an extraordinary tenacity. And she created St Christopher's in 1967 with relatively little resource, certainly no government funding. And I'll explain a little bit later, very countercultural. And right from the beginning, she had an extraordinary vision. And her vision was this, of a world in which all dying people and those close to them have access to the care and support they need when and wherever they need it. And she used to go on and talk about whoever they are as well. And she wasn't interested just in looking after people in southeast London, which is where we're based. Right from the beginning, she had this global perspective. And a lot of the work that I do today as an academic lead is global, and that's a direct legacy from her original vision and what she wanted to do. But although the global work was very important, right from the beginning, her whole focus was this idea that you matter. You matter as a human being. And this is a very well-known quotation. It's absolutely at the heart of our philosophy, our work, the kind of care that I hope that Sunny received. And she talked about people mattering because of who they were. You matter to the end of your life. And she was very keen that people knew that even when they couldn't be cured, they still had value in society, and they still deserved a very high quality care. And she was really committed to moving away from a belief that people who could no longer be cured or who could no longer contribute to society was certainly not a burden. And she saw it very much as a privilege caring for them, and that was absolutely fundamental to her philosophy, and it would be fundamental to our work today, and I hope to the hope that people feel. Very often, I've been working in this job for over 30 years, and many people that I met earlier in my career had been told there was nothing else that could be done for them, and that was a gutting experience. Just at the time when they needed care most, what they heard was medics and others say, there's nothing else that we can do. And what she said is, no, there is something we can do. You matter, and we're going to make your last days, months, weeks, years matter too. I love this photograph. It's very old. It probably was taken in the 1970s. I like it for lots of reasons. I love the fact that the nurse is sitting on the bed, she's breaking all the rules, but what I love most is that she's utterly connected human to human. And for me, this is another huge source of positivity and hope for people. And when people are coming to the end of their life, it actually doesn't matter where you are in life. It doesn't matter if you're having a baby, an operation, an investigation, or you are coming to the end of your life. You want to be seen as a human. And when you're, the people that look after you bring their humanity, it is so powerful and so important. And I'm going to talk a little bit about David Tasmer. David Tasmer was a man that Cicely Saunders met in the 1940s, and he was a Polish immigrant. He was a waiter in London. He was dying in St Thomas's, and she met him when she was working there. And he was really utterly critical to her early vision and intention around building St Christopher's Hospice. And she realised that he was a man in terrible pain, and he wasn't just in physical pain. He was dying young. He was in his 40s. He felt that he had no legacy, that he had left nothing to this world. He was terribly alone, and she befriended him. And he was, I think, probably one of the first Polish. She loved 3 Polish men in her life, and he was the first. And she talked about going and sitting with him regularly and trying to comfort him. And she would often read him the Psalms or talk to him about his faith. But one night she said to him, "Would you like me to read more from the Bible?" And he said, "No. I want only what's in your heart and your mind." And for her, this was a really important point. It was about really wanting the science that she was already starting to construct about high quality care, but also that humanity. And what she offered him was a friendship, and what he offered her back was a friendship. And it was this human-to-human connection. And I don't know how many people I've looked after in my working life who's come to the end of life. I would say probably nearly 1,000 people. I can probably remember most of them in some way as a person. It's been a privilege. It's been very enriching for me. But I think when you take the person, when you meet person to person, like this nurse and the woman that she's looking after, there's real connection there, and that's about hope. One of the really important things for Cicely, and this is really critical to who she was, is that actually her ambitions for a good end of life for people was totally counter to what was happening at the time. So just by way of background, she was born in about, I think she was born in I should absolutely know this. I think she was born in 1918, and she was very well educated. She went to Rodine. She had a place at Oxford to study PPE, and the war broke out. And she made a decision at that point that she was going to leave university and become a nurse. And she went and did her nursing training. She loved it. She had a very bad back, and so after the war she went back and she trained as an almoner, which is similar to a social worker. And then when she started to really see how badly people were dying in hospital in particular, as a nurse and a social worker, she decided to train as a doctor in order to really influence the system. And one of the reasons that she needed to do that was that the whole system was moving in totally the other direction. So post-war, our health policy was around building hospitals. It was a really fantastically optimistic time. Antibiotics were on the up. Surgery was so much more successful. People could expect cure where they had never expected it before. And then here was Cicely saying, actually, despite all of that, I want to look after the people that you can't really be bothered with, or that you think there's nothing else that can be done with. And if you read any of her biographical work, she watched people on cancer wards particularly, when there was nothing else that could be done, they were moved into a side room and they weren't seen on their ward rounds and so on. And what she said was, you matter because you're you. And she said, I'm going to create an alternative system of care in which you will matter and be looked after. So she was very countercultural. She was swimming against the tide. And one of the reasons that she always said that was important was this, that suffering is only intolerable when nobody cares. And for her, knowing that she was going to have an alternative plan, somewhere like St Christopher's would be created, was really important. One of the other things that I think is really great around a sort of a more optimistic stance on end of life is that death doesn't need to be as grim as you imagine. And that's a direct quote from the, she did Desert Island Discs, I think it was in the 1980s. And she talked about the fact that she had known many people who'd known more happiness at the end of life than in much of their own life. I love this picture. This is early days at St Christopher's, and you might be forgiven for thinking that that nurse is giving out medicine. Actually, what she's doing is the drinks round. And that lives to today. And my sister-in-law died a few years ago, very sadly, in a hospice. She hadn't spoken for a couple of days. My husband, who's here, and I were sitting by her bed, and I heard the clink, clink, clink of the drinks trolley coming round, and one of the lovely volunteers knocked on Naomi's door and said, do anybody want a drink? And I don't know whether it was Niall or I who said, oh, no, she's... No, thank you. And suddenly from her bed, she croaked, cock. And I just loved that moment. Do you remember that, Niall? You know, I love the fact that people are still having a drink. And it's great for people's appetite, by the way. If you've no appetite, have a sherry. There's good reasons for that. And that drinks round exists to this day in most hospices. And I love this picture as well. It's very old. It's probably late 1960s. A man who's dying very prematurely, and his family are around his bed in the hospice doing a puzzle. You probably can't see enough. It's not big enough. Drinking lots of pop, eating crisps, and they're just having ordinary life. And I'm just so pleased for those kind of images, and that's an everyday occurrence in the life and the work of St Christopher's today and many other hospices. Something else that I think is really optimistic is this notion that your life has value and your legacy is important. And for me, a lot of the work that I've done with people as they approach the end of life is to think about their legacy. Sometimes that legacy is about leaving films or stories for your children. It might be about wanting to tell something about your life. It may be wanting to sort something out and get something really sorted out. I had a colleague who died very prematurely, quite shockingly, a couple of months ago. And in the 3 weeks between his diagnosis and his death, he didn't just sort out his family and all that needed to happen for them, but he did a full action plan for the charity shops that he ran in our hospice. That's legacy, and that's the long-term offer that he was making to us beyond his death. So David Tasmer, who I spoke about earlier, Cicely's first love, as he was dying, as I said, he had this terrible fear that he would never be remembered. And he gave her £500 when he died. That was in the 1940s. It would have been a lot of money. And he said, "I want to be a window in your home." And what he was talking about was the early aspirations for hospice. And so to this day, there is a window with that plaque on it, which reminds everybody of David Tasmer's contribution to hospice. And that's not only about changing the lives of many thousands and thousands of people in South East London, it's about the whole work that we do globally and the impact that St Christopher's and the wider global hospice movement has had. So he certainly had legacy. When Cicely reflected on his death, she talked about him having come to the right place for him. And he never enjoyed the Christian belief and confidence that she did. But she learnt a lot from him, and she talked about this principle of hospice care, which was about freedom of the spirit and to be whoever you wanted to be, as long as you did what was important to you. This is a bit of a long quote, but I'm going to read it because Cicely then went on and had 2 more relationships. So she had a very brief relationship with David Tasmer, and then she met a second patient, Anton, who she had a much more profound long-term relationship. He was also dying, and he died in her care, and people believe that he was the love of her life and that she hardly survived that loss. But then, to her surprise and to the world's surprise, she met her third love, another Polish man, a well-known artist who had a gallery in South East London, and she bought a picture of his. He contacted her, they fell in love, and they got married in her 60s. And they lived together very close to the hospice, and he died in the hospice in the early 1990s. And she always used to talk about new things that could happen even at the end. Of course, being in your 60s is not at the end, but I think she would have felt that perhaps her opportunities to marry, to have the kind of happy long-term relationship that she was able to have with Marion was beyond her. But of course it wasn't. She and he were very happy. That's a picture that he did of her. I love that. I had that in my office. It's always a sadness to me that I never met Cicely Saunders. And there are many people who work at St Christopher's who were appointed by her and still remember her and were looked after by her. But I never met her. And even though I sat at her desk and did some of her job, I just used to have that photo. I had that picture in my office because it was such a lovely picture of her done by him. One of the other things that I think is hugely optimistic, and was certainly very optimistic for me when I worked as the CEO at St Christopher's, was all the community investment that happened. And I think that when you work as part of the NHS, there are all sorts of positives. Certainly as a leader, your money comes from government and so on, whereas at St Christopher's we raise about £14.5 million a year ourselves. That's something like £42,000 a day, just in case you're not realising what a big job that is. But community involvement is really important, and it's not just about raising funds, it's about supporting families, caring for patients, bereavement support, engaging new champions, teaching and so on. And when Cicely cut the turf at St Christopher's, it certainly wasn't an easy run for her. She had to wait something like 20 years to raise the money and to buy the land and to build it. And so very often when people say, oh, she had it easy, or it happened quickly and easily for St Christopher's, it certainly didn't. It was an uphill struggle, but she was unrelenting, partly because she had so much community support. This is a picture of Robert Twycross, and it would be very easy to focus a whole talk on the history of St Christopher's on Cicely, but there were so many other people that she brought in around her. She was one of those amazing people who knew her inadequacies, and when she knew her inadequacies, she was very good at finding people who could do the job better than her. So Robert Twycross was a doctor, he was a very strong scientist, and she gave him the job of sorting out what was very poor pain control in the 1960s and 70s for people who were dying with terminal illness. And he talked about killing the Brompton cocktail. And some of you might remember what the Brompton cocktail was. It was a morphine-based drug, but it had all sorts of other things in it, and it could make you feel pretty ghastly, even if it controlled your pain. And what he did was seminal research that meant that today, the majority of people who come to the end of their life can expect a relatively pain-free death, if not completely pain-free. Sunny had quite significant pain, but it was very well managed at the end of her life. And people like Robert Twycross, who was around in the 60s and 70s, he's still alive now, he's in his 90s, was absolutely critical to that. And there were lots of people like Robert that Cicely brought around her to really take forward the science as well as the art of care. The other thing that I think was very optimistic in our history was this idea of community. And here, this is a picture of our dining room, probably in the 70s. There's a picture by Marion at the back. So he was married to Cicely by then and painting furiously. In the front, you can see a lovely table with lots of children. We used to have a nursery at St Christopher's, and people who worked there would bring their kids, and that was about young life. You can see some patients sitting there having their lunch, and then there are all sorts of staff and volunteers having their lunch there too. And you wouldn't find that in a hospital, but community life is still very important somewhere like St Christopher's, St Joseph's and others. And I think it's part of the optimism, the life, the confidence that we have as an organisation. So that's the early years, and very briefly I just wanted to say it's never an up without a down. So the early 2000s were really, really challenging. It was before my time. I came in as CEO in the in 2014, but between 2002 and 2010 it was really tough, and that was the downside of optimism. Cicely had done amazing work. She'd been seen as a global leader. Hospices were growing up all over the UK and beyond. Just to give you some idea, when St Christopher's opened, there were probably 3 hospices, and by the late 1980s, there were over 200 in the UK. In the world, the majority of high-income countries had started to develop hospice and palliative care, and St Christopher's had almost run away with itself, and there were issues around sustainability, financial sustainability, this challenge of being a leader whilst also meeting growing local needs, and this idea about needing to invest in research alongside care. So times were really, really tough, and there had to be a lot of changes in that early part of the 21st century. So what does the hospice look like today? So just to give you some ideas about our size.
Oh, sorry. Cameras.
Sorry. So we're much bigger than when Cicely had certainly set it up and was alive and worked there. As of last year, we looked after over 7,000 people. We have 32 beds. They were all full today, and we have about 1,300 people at home at any one time. We have a children's bereavement programme. We've looked after about 500 children this year, and we would be educating between 10 and 12,000 people a year. We have a massive charity shop network. If any of you go to our charity shops, thank you very much. We've got 26 of them. They move something like 2 tons of stuff a week, and we make over £2 million of profit a year through our charity shops. So they are a really important part of our work, and what you can see is that it's a really big business, but focused primarily on care, education, and research. As I say, we cost about 25 million a year to run, and about 14.5 million of that have to be raised by the hospice itself. Our community involvement is still really, really important. On the right hand, on your left hand side, was probably one of the most touching moments of my time when I was chief executive. That was right at the beginning of COVID, and you'll remember that nobody had any PPE. Do you remember that, in those first few months? And it was over the Easter period, and we put out a call on Facebook and through Twitter and a whole variety of others, and you probably can't read it, but we were saying if you've got anything that you can give us, we would really like it. We had hundreds and hundreds of donations. We had masks from nail bars, we had goggles from school laboratories. It was so moving, and I remember going into work that day and being moved to tears by the fact that our community still cared for us enough to take that trouble. And we have people who run for us, walk for us, donate clothes, do crazy things like jump out of aeroplanes and all sorts of things. But community involvement remains really important and is absolutely part of our hope. Quality of life, even when time is short, remains our priority, and I could show this video for you at the end if you're interested, but this only happened about 2.5 months ago. This is a gentleman who was on our wards. He was a dancer when he was a young man. He really wanted to have, without being too sentimental about it, one last dance with his wife. And so he practiced with one of our nurses using that walker, the dance, and there's somebody behind him who is moving him on that walker. And then when his wife came in, they had their dance. And somebody actually from our data group played the piano for it. And it was very moving. But it's about what matters to you. And that's what we really focus on and is very important to us. So just before I finish, let me talk a little bit about the future. And the first thing to say is that what people are dying from and how is completely changing. And you probably know that, but when I was doing this slide, it was very, very stark. So now, I actually need to update this, but life expectancy is so much greater. Do you know that if you're born in Sweden this year as a girl, you are likely to live to 106? And we regularly have people who are over 100 in our hospice. So people live much longer. And instead of dying of either infectious diseases, as we did at the beginning of the 1900s, or cancer, most people now will die of dementia, some sort of organ failure like heart failure or renal failure, or a multiple morbidity. What's really important is that people's social context is changing hugely, and so people very often people are living alone. Far fewer people live with somebody else than used to happen, and friends and neighbours are carers rather than family. And the other really important thing is that most people coming to the end of their lives now have long-term frailty and a level of disability, compared with, say, when I began my career and you died of cancer and you knew that you were going to die, certainly in less than a year and probably in a matter of months. And you often died quite healthily apart from your cancer. This is a very controversial but interesting piece of work done by somebody who was a PhD student of mine a long time ago, and she has done a piece of work called The Value of Death. And I would really recommend it, actually. It's not an academic piece of work, but her work with Richard Smith and a lot of people, global leaders, is this idea that death and dying needs to be recognised not only as a normal part of life, but as a valuable part of life. And that care of the dying and grieving needs to be rebalanced. And she's got, they have a couple of principles on the right-hand side, but the point that she really wanted to make in this work was that so much of our society and global society wants to deny that death is even part of life. And then when it happens, it's utterly devastating for people. And if we could recognise its value, and its value is not just about the way we live, but about climate change and all sorts of other issues, we would have a much more healthy relationship with death, but a much more healthy relationship with ourselves, the planet, and so on. It does mean, as part of that utopia, that realistic utopia, that we need to do things differently. And death and dying in the UK and around the world has become completely over-medicalised. Cicely Saunders would be horrified. Although she really wanted to invest in the head as well as the heart, she always saw the value of family, of volunteers, and so on. And we have allowed that to dry up, and people think that doctors know everything and that death, dying and loss is the responsibility of professionals. So part of what the work that we're doing now at St Christopher's is re-engaging community members, citizens as partners in care. And if you engage in it as a citizen, and that's kind of upstream, so you do it while you're well, you're so much more likely to die better, and there's good evidence of that. So it is about moving beyond institutional and professional power to something that's much more shared. And Compassionate Neighbours, on the right-hand side, is a project I've been involved in for many years now, and it's all about people in community, people in streets, taking responsibility, becoming interested in other people in their local area who are coming to the end of life, and offering true friendship. It's reciprocal. It's not about doing good. It's about engaging with and enjoying friendship with somebody that's coming to the end of their life. Just in finishing, I wanted to talk about this very sobering paradox that exists in contemporary dying from a global perspective. On the left-hand side is a picture of somebody who was receiving care in COVID in the UK, and they were having every bit of treatment that was possible. In fact, we would argue that people in our society are over-treated very often, particularly in old age. And I certainly have a mum in her 90s who I imagine has actually really come to the end of her life in her heart, but we continue to treat everything that happens to her, and we can do it. She probably takes about 22 medications a day. And on the right-hand side, that very bizarre map of the world is the picture of morphine that is available per head of population. So you can see how bloated Australia and Canada and the States and Europe is, and just how depleted South America and Africa and parts of Asia are. And that is shocking. Morphine needs to be a basic human right for people that are coming to the end of their lives. And the very fact that there's this utter sort of dreadful distribution globally is something that we really need to attend to. So people suffer on the left in our society because they're overtreated, and people suffer globally on the right because they're undertreated. Just to finish, there's something about being really inclusive in the future, and we're doing a lot more work with people that die with frailty, people who have no recourse to public funds, people who are homeless, and so on. I don't need to talk about all of that, except to say that actually, if we're going to do our job well at St Christopher's, we have to open the doors to everybody, and not just to the people who can find their way easily into our care. So I'm just going to finish with going back to Sunny and what I understood that she did so well despite dying prematurely. And I think there is this very important relationship which Cicely really got to the nub of in her philosophical thinking right at the beginning of her work, which is if you live well and you enjoy life in the knowledge that death is part of life, you are likely to die well. And if you die well, and dying well is very often about thinking about legacy, about being really clear about your wishes and so on, the people that you leave behind will be able to grieve well. And actually when people grieve well, when people can let go, and it doesn't mean that the pain of loss is lost, but that actually you can see beyond your grief, then you carry on living well because you know the value of life. And so this is what Cicely was trying to do through the hospice 60 years ago, and it's what we're trying to do today. And I just finish with this prayer that Cicely used to talk to people about when they said, help me, help me die well. She used to say, there are 3 things that you might want to do. The first is about saying thank you and recognizing just what great gifts life gave you, saying sorry, and then properly saying farewell. Thank you.
Any questions? Emma?
Yes, I'd like to ask I remember in early 2000s that we heard about St Christopher's being financially in a very bad situation. What was done to recover from that? Because we just stopped hearing about it.
Yeah. Well, they had to do some really, they had to be very brave. And one of the things that did happen was that a new leader came in. So Cicely ceased to be in the kind of executive leadership role that she wasn't the executive lead, but she had very strong executive leadership roles. And they brought somebody in, Dame Barbara Monroe, who, she was a social worker there, and she had to make some really tough decisions. But most importantly, they created a much stronger relationship with government, for example, so they started to get NHS funding. They had to, for a long time, slim down some of their activities, for example, like research, and really focus on care. A lot of their global work diminished for a long time. There were sadly lots and lots of staff redundancies. It was a very, very tough time. And it's inevitable in organisational life. And when I spoke to Dame Barbara Monroe about it as part of an oral history, we talked about overreach and overspend. And it's very easy for something like that to happen, particularly when you're running on a wave of national, global, local approval for something that's been so hard to win, I think.
You mentioned about finding out what's important to them, the patients. I mean, do you just simply ask them straight out? I mean, how do you discover that?
That's a great question. I mean, when I worked clinically, I used to say to people quite candidly, if time is short, what's most important to you now? And I was never, ever disappointed by what people were happy to talk about. And for some people, it was really often about relationships. It might be about reconciliation, it might be about celebration. Sometimes it was slightly crazy, or something that you wouldn't have expected. A lot of people that I looked after in East London wanted perhaps to go back to Bangladesh to die, or to their country that they'd grown up in. But asking people, and now we have a particular focus at St Christopher's called What Matters to You, and we really, really encourage people to move beyond their medical and their clinical needs to what is most important for them to achieve.
And if somebody says they want to go back to Bangladesh, do you facilitate that?
We would make every effort for that to happen. And sometimes it's completely against the odds. When I was working at St Joseph's, I remember a very young man. He was Indian. He'd come with his family he was an engineer, and he became very unwell. And when he knew that time was short, he said, I really want to go back. And it was very important for him to go back to the Golden Temple. And so we managed to raise enough money for him and his wife and his 2 children to fly. And I remember us organising the drugs that meant that he would have enough for, if he managed to live a couple of weeks, he would have the right drugs. And he took our syringe drivers, and there was a lot of discussion about, was that a good idea? And I remember thinking, just take them. And when the family got to Heathrow, we'd gone through British Airways. He was due to go through. When they arrived, the British Airways felt that he was too unwell to travel. And the wife rang up, and we were in a meeting. It was like, I remember it very clearly, it was the end of the week. We were just handing over for the weekend. And she said, they won't let us get on the plane. And we said, look, don't come back, because if you travel all the way back to East London from Heathrow, he definitely won't be well enough to travel. We'll try and find a way through. And we started to ring up lots of airways and so on, and we didn't have any luck, and all of us were feeling absolutely sick. And then we got a call from his wife saying, we're on we're on a plane. And we're like, how did you do it? And she said, the three of us just cried, the wife and two children, until they let him on. And he got there, and he got to the Golden Temple, and he died where he wanted to. And I mean, that's kind of one of our biggest stories of success. But we would make every effort if that was really important.
Yes, sir. This one.
Sorry.
Thank you.
We've heard a lot on the radio this morning about Esther Ranson and her consideration of assisted dying. I just wondered how that impacted on what you do at the hospice.
It's a very, I think it's a very important topic to have a conversation about. And historically, the hospice movement would not have seen it, perhaps, as a priority. I wouldn't say they disregard it, but for the majority of our patients, we're of the view that the kind of suffering that leads people to want an assisted death is something that we can often manage. And so historically, the hospice sector might have said, we don't think it's necessary. If more people got access to palliative care, it wouldn't be so necessary. My own view, and this is my personal view, not the hospice view in particular, is that society has changed. And I have watched over the 30 plus years that I've been in this sector a huge shift to choice, for example, to self-determination. And as people get older and get more fearful about dying without dignity, for example, or they don't have carers, or they don't want to be a drain on society, and so on. There are lots of reasons. I think it's something that all of us, and when I say all of us, I mean health systems, hospices, citizens, we have to give really careful thought to. So certainly at St Christopher's, we are invested at the moment in listening very, very hard to what people want. Whether or not it would ever be something that hospices would be involved in is a whole nother issue. But I think if we really want to live by our philosophy about what matters to you, we can't say, yes, what matters to you? Okay, we don't want to hear about that, so we'll just forget that. So in my head, we've got to do the listening and then think anew.
So if instead of the Golden Temple, it was Dignitas in Zurich that somebody wanted to go to, would you help them?
Well, there have been patients in both of the hospices that I've worked in leadership roles who have made that decision to go. It is against the law in this country, but we would want to be humane and connected and involved in whatever was most important for that person. And so, you know, we're very clear about where the law lies, we're very clear about what we can do. But certainly there was a TV programme made about a gentleman who was under our care who chose to go to Switzerland. And we did not shy away from being on that TV programme. And we looked after his wife and we supported him until he went.
Yes, Jeff.
My father died in a hospice, and as he died, and my mother was with me, we sort of left the room, and there was someone with the drinks trolley, which also had a packet of cigarettes on it, which I thought was very helpful.
The time for being dismissive of cigarettes and alcohol and stuff is not then.
We also have a drinks trolley in this church, and the end of every talk is an opportunity to continue asking questions and to share a drink in the vestry at the back. And if anyone else has questions now, it seems not, or anything online, Imo? No, then I think that's what we shall do. Yes, I think Scotland came also, and here also is a drink. You obviously expressed interest in this.
Thank you.
A small small
Thank you so
token
much.
from St George's
Thank
for
you.
giving the talk this
Oh,
evening.
you're so welcome.
We're very grateful. It meant a lot to us to hear from St Christopher's. And thank you very much, Heather, for
Thank you
coming
for the
in
invitation.
on this cold evening and
Not at all.
giving us a talk.
Okay.
And thank you all very much. Thank you all very much for coming out this evening too. It's lovely to see so many of you.